Started. Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we are learning Maseches Bava Metzia Daf Dalet. The only way we will understand this daf is if we do a little bit of a chazara. So please join me back on Gimel Amud Aleph for just a moment. We're going to read one brisa and then we'll come back to our daf. It's just, this is the kind of lot that you really needed to learn in one shot, and it just wasn't truncated for a daf. So if you look about 12 lines or so from the bottom, we learned the brisa from Rabbi Phil that said, Manali biyadcha, I claim you owe me 100. V'hala omer ein lecha biyadi klum. And the Eidim me'idin oso sheyesh lo chamishim zuz. The Eidim say that really I said I owed 0. The Eidim said, no, Phil, you lied. You don't actually owe 0. You owe 50. So then nosem lo chamishim zuz, and you make a shvua. And then we said this line, Shalote odas piv gedola mehadas edemi kal v'chomer. And we didn't know what the kal v'chomer was. Now flip to Gimel Amud Beis. And on Gimel Amud Beis, about 7 lines down, we were trying to figure out this kal v'chomer. We're going to learn one line of the kal v'chomer 7 lines down, and then we'll go to our starting point at the bottom of this page. We had said, umay kal v'chomer, what was the kal v'chomer that Rav Chia was referring to? And the Gemara had said as follows. We had said yesterday, uma piv, she'ein mechayvo mamon mechayvo shvua, that just like by a person's admittance, by a person's speaking, they are not able to bring about a chiyuv of mammon for another person, they could bring about a shvua, then Eidim, who are able to bring about a monetary consequence by their words, all the more so that they should be mechayev a shvua. So we've been trying to figure out, every time we came up with what we thought the kal v'chomer was, we questioned it. This is our background for today, and we need to figure out what is going on with this kal v'chomer. I'm going to be honest and open with all of you. This is a harder blot, and it requires way more time than we have. But still, we're going to navigate it. But that makes about 0 of us. Not even you have all night. All right, here we go. So says the Gemara 5 lines. So this says the Gemara 5 lines from the bottom. Ella, because yesterday we asked Akasha on the previous kal v'chomer. So then the Gemara says, Ella, what is really the kal v'chomer? Asya me'eid echad. Uma eid echad she'ein mechayvo mamon mechayvo shvua. An eid echad is not able to bring about a chiyuv of mamon in a third party. Just by me being an eid echad, I can't come up and say, oh no, really you're chayav 50. I can't say that. But my stature as an eid echad could bring about a chiyuv of you making a shvua. So that's great. Eidim shemechayven oso mamon eino din shemechayven oso shvua. The Gemara says, therefore, we see that Eidim are able to bring about a shvua. And this perhaps is the kal v'chomer that Rav Chia was referencing on the previous Amud on Daf Gimel Amud Aleph toward the bottom of the page. Says the Gemara, no dice. Why not? Because Mala Eid Echad, an Eid Echad has a weakness. Shekain al ma shehu meid hu nishba. He's giving testimony about the promise that a person made. However, Tomar be'edim, to the top of Dalet Amud Aleph, shal mashu kafar hu nishba. They're pressing on different points in the case of Rav Chia. Let's remember Rav Chia's case. I say, manali biyadcha, you have 100 of my dollars. You say, no, I don't, I have 0. The Eidim say, you lied, it's 50. The Eid Echad's talking about the 50 he agreed, the 50 that I know that is mine. And the other 50 is what the Eidim are focusing on, which is the money that he was kofer. They're not talking about the same thing. So therefore, we reject that. That can't be Rav Chia's kal v'chomer either. And therefore, let's try our 4th possibility. El Amar of Papa, Asimi Gilgul Shvua de Eid Echad. We're still talking about an Eid Echad, but we're talking about a Gilgul Shvua. A Gilgul Shvua is an idea that we saw earlier in Shas and Maseches Nedarim, that it's an area where typically we would not have required a shvua, but let's say in area A, you wouldn't require a shvua, but because in area B, you require a shvua, therefore we also add in area A. So that's what the Gemara says is what our kal v'chomer is, that if by an Eid Echad, in a case of Gilgul Shvua, he's not able to bring about a monetary payment, but he can bring about a shvua, the same must be true with Eidim. Says the Gemara 3 lines down, no. You really can't compare from the case of Eid Echad by a shvua goreres shvua, because that was a very specific case where one shvua preceded another. Tomar be'edim de mamon kamachaybe. By mamon, the shvua came about by Eidim. The shvua that came about was because of mamon, not because of a preceding shvua. Therefore, the cases are not comparable. Says the Gemara, I hear you, but piv yochiach. For those of us who are familiar with Shas, we can already see the trend that we're about to head to Lo Re'izeh Kire'izeh, that maybe, says the Gemara, a case of Modeh B'Mixas, which is what Piv means, that maybe the case of Piv, what is this footnote here? Ela Piv Yochiach, that maybe a case of Modeh B'Mixas would prove that, in fact, this is true, that there's no Shavua preceding a Shavua. It says the Gemara, Ma'ala Piv Shekain Enu Be'Hakchasha. Okay, but Piv can't really create Haklasha. Only Eidim can create Haklasha, which is a real contradiction between sources. Says the Gemara, Eid Echad Yochiach. You're right, by Piv that's true, but Eid Echad can, in fact, create Haklasha. So it says the Gemara, Sheyeshna be'Haklasha Mechayevo b'Shvua, that Eid Echad can create Haklasha and be Mechayev Shvua. Says the Gemara, there's a weakness to Eid Echad also. Mal Eid Echad Shekain al Mashe Hu Meid Hu Nishba. Tomar be'edim she'al mashe kafar hu nishba. This was the point we made on the bottom of Gimel Amud Beis, which helped us to reject our previous version of the Kal V'chomer, and that is that the Eid Echad and the Eidim are focusing on different dollars. The Eidim are focusing on the dollars that the guy was kofer, and the other case, not the Eidim, the Eid Echad, were focused on dollars that everyone agreed to. Says the Gemara, Piv Yochiach. From that we can learn from Piv v'chazar hadin, and we have a cyclical reasoning. In other words, what we're going to do is say that we have our basic Kal V'chomer, but our basic Kal V'chomer is only true if we couple it with Piv, which is Modeh B'Mixas, and with Eid Echad. So that's why the Gemara says Lo Re'izeh Kire'izeh, v'lo Re'izeh Kire'izeh. But Hatzad HaShaveh Shebehen Sh'al Yedei Taina Ukfira Hein Bain V'Nishba. Just like in any case where there's a taina and where there's kfira, there's a claim, and where the Baal Din, while he claims money, the other person is kofer. So then, and there's a shvua, Af ani avi edim sha'al yedei tainu kfira heim baim v'nishba. This is the Kal V'chomer. Says the Gemara, now we have our answer to Reb Chia. Reb Chia on the bottom of Gimel Amud Aleph wanted to teach us a Kal V'chomer. On the top of Gimel Amud Beis, we started to learn what that Kal V'chomer is. And the Gemara, in a very sophisticated form, says our Kal V'chomer is a case of Shvua Goreres, Shvua coupled with Lo Re'izeh Kire'izeh, the Tzad HaShaveh Shebehen of Piv Yochiach and of Eidim Yochiach. Again, very sophisticated Gemara. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. Ma'ale atzad HaShaveh Shebehen shekain lo huchza kafran, tomar be'edim shekain huchza kafran. I understand in the case of Modeh B'Mixas, in the case of Eid Echad, that we have a case of Lo Huchza Kafran. We don't know if there's a lie. However, Tomar Be'edim, when it comes to a case of Eidim, which is 2 people, Shekain Huchza Kafran. The case of Reb Chia was a case of Huchza Kafran, where we know somebody lied. Let's remember back to where the brisa that we started. The brisa that we started said that I said to you, you owe me 100, and you said, no, I owe you 0. So that means you're Huchza Kafran, you're a liar. You're definitely lying. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. Uve Eidim mi Huchza Kafran. Is there such a thing? Is it necessarily true in the case of Reb Chia that the Eidim were definitely lying? Amar of Idi bar Avin, Amar of Chizda. HaKofer b'milveh, if a person is kofer alone and he ends up lying, he's still kasher le'edus. And b'pikadon pasal le'edus. So therefore, you can't say that he's huchzak kafran, lav dafka that he's huchzak kafran, he still might be kasher le'edus. Ella, says the Gemara, you're right. Parachachi, really the question we should be asking is like this. Male atzad HaShaveh shebehen shekain einon b'toras hazama, that when we deal with Piv and when we deal with Eid Echad, that's not how Hazama is created. Hazama is only created with the claim of another set of Eidim who say Manu Hayisem. Tomar be'edim sheyeshnon b'toras Hazama. You can't make any comparison between the world of Piv and Eid Echad to the world of Eidim, because 2 Eidim can create Hazama, whereas a single Eid or a person who's Modeh B'Mixas Ataina, Pashut, that those cases cannot create a case of Hazama. So the Gemara is asking a stark kasha on our Kal V'chomer. You're trying to compare 2 things that can't be compared. What's the chiddush of one of our cases? The chiddush of one of our cases is going to be the case of Hazama, that when it comes to one Eid cannot create Eidim Zomimin, but 2 Eidim can. Says the Gemara, Halo kasha. This is actually not a question. Reb Chia Toras Hazama lo parich. Reb Chia says that the Toras Hazama is not a kasha. Rashi has a slightly lengthier Rashi over here, and he goes through the details as to why this isn't a concern. And therefore, according to Rav Chia, we have our Kal V'chomer, which is this coupling of the Kal V'chomer of Gilgul Shvua, along with Piv Yochiach and Eid Echad Yochiach. And no problem at all, the kasha from Hazama is not a kasha. Says the Gemara, fine, we have our Kal V'chomer, very good. In other words, we spent an amud and a half, an amud and a quarter, trying to answer the Gemara. On the top of Gimel Amud Beis, 7 lines down, we said Umay Kal V'chomer. We answered it on the top of Dalet Amud Aleph, and finally finished explaining it now. But the Gemara moves on to analyze still further. And we're halfway down on Dalet Amud Aleph. We'll be going toward the bottom of Dalet. Oh, just kidding. Of Dalet Amud Beis. Don't get excited. These Gemaras are very thick. We need weeks to learn this Gemara, not minutes.
No, thank you.
I hope for my sake we do, because I don't want to hear this every night. Like we gotta get there. We gotta get there.
Actually, short Daf.
I haven't looked yet. I just know that it's not yet. Hashem should bless us. Hashem should bless. Pesach's coming. Purim's coming. We got to figure this out. Yeah, thank you. Okay. So here we go. So says the Gemara, Ella, really the kasha on Rav Chia is not about the Kal V'chomer. We figured out the Kal V'chomer. So says the Gemara, Ella de Ka'amar v'tana tuna. Really, the problem with Rav Chia is the raya that he brought. If you look back on Gimel Amud Aleph, what happened is that Rav Chia taught us this case of, I said to you, Manali biyadcha, you have 100 of my dollars. You said I owe you 0. The Eidim came in saying 50. And what did Rav Chia bring as a raya? V'tana tuna, he brought in our Mishnah from the open of the Maseches on Shnaim Ochsim Betalis, Ze Omer Ani Metzia. That is the Mishnah he brought. Says the Gemara, Mi Dami? Are the cases of Rav Chia and our Mishnah, are those cases comparable? Let's review the two cases and see if they're comparable. The case of our Mishnah is very simple. You and I grab a talis at the same time. We both say, I found it and it's fully mine. The din of the Mishnah was Shvua and Yachloku. What was the case of Reb Chia on the bottom of Gimel Amud Aleph? That was a case where I said, Manali biyadcha. I said, you have 100 of my dollars, and you say 0. Eidim come and say, not true. You lied. You really owe Phil 50. Are these cases really comparable? Says the Gemara, Midami. Hasam, in one case, lemalve isle sade. In one case, there are witnesses to the malve, and lelove les le sade de lo masik le velomidi. To the borrower, there are no witnesses at all. It must be that there were no witnesses in the case of Reb Chia for at least one aspect of it, not the aspect of the Eidim coming to say you definitely owe 50, but for the other 50, there were no Eidim at all. Otherwise, why would Reb Chia have made a shvua if there were Eidim? And Hacha, in the case of our Mishnah, ki hechi da anan sade bahai. In our case of the Mishnah of Shnayim, Ochsim, Betalis, says the Gemara that we are anan sadeh, we testify on behalf of the two people of our Mishnah. We said Shnayim, Ochsim, Betalis. What we're basically saying about these two people is that we assume by each of them that they have ownership. Even though that's true, there is still going to be a shvua. And because that's true, says the Gemara, why in the world did Rav Chia use our Mishnah as a raya to his case? Our Mishnah of Shnaim Ochsim Betalis is not a raya to the case of Rav Chia. If in fact we're going to quote the Shita of not the Shita, if in fact Reb Chia is going to quote our Mishnah as a raya, it's Aidach the Reb Chia Itmar. It must be talking about another Shita of Reb Chia. Damar Reb Chia, another case, very similar but not exactly the same. This Gemara, I remember from when I learned it many years ago, is subject to some serious discussion, and says the Gemara as follows. To Amar Reb Chia, we are 2/3 of the way down on Dalet Amud Aleph. Manali biyadcha, I say to you, you have 100 of my dollars in your possession. Hala Amar ein lecha biyadi ala nunzuz vehelach. I only have 50 zuz, and here it is. There's a machlokes rishonim about what vehelach means. Does it mean that I actually gave it to you? Or does it mean that I didn't give it to you, but in theory it's yours? There are halachic nafkaminas. So this is what the case is. What does Reb Chia say? Reb Chia says, you're chayiv in such a case. You're chayiv to make a shvua. My taima, why is it that in such a case you are chayiv to make a shvua? Says the Gemara, because Halach nami kimode b'mixas hataina dami. Halach is also like a case of mode b'mixas hataina. When I say to you, here is your item, I owe you 50, here it is, it's yours. That's no different, says Rav Chia, than me admitting that I took something from you. Right? That makes sense. If I say this is yours, so then it's mode b'mixas hataina. And by mode b'mixas hataina, the halacha is yishava. That's why Rav Chia says you're chayiv. And therefore, on this, v'tana tuna, this is where we should see our Mishnah, Shnai mochzim v'talis, v'hahacha kevan the toughest, since I grabbed the talis in the Mishnah on Daf Beis Amud Aleph, on ansade demai the toughest helachu v'ktani yishava. This is where we see that because there's a shvu in our Mishnah, and because in the case of Halach, we see there's a shvu as well. Therefore, our Mishnah is a good raya for the case of Halach of Rav Chia. Very good. And then the Gemara really digs into this case of Halach, because we learn the Shita of Rav Chia, that in the case of Halach, if you say to me that I owe you 50, and I say to you, Yishava, that is our Mishnah, but Rav Sheshas Amar Halach Pater. Rav Sheshas argues and says that in the case of Halach, if I were to say to you, here is that which I owe you, Rav Sheshas is of the opinion that I'd be pater from a shvua, not chayiv. So machlokes Rav Chia and Rav Sheshas, in a case of Halach, Rav Chia would say you're chayiv on a shvua. Rav Sheshas would say you're pater on a shvua. And says the Gemara 10 lines from the bottom, my taima, what is the reason why Rav Sheshas says you're pater from a shvua? So the Gemara says a difficult answer. My taima, says the Gemara, kevan de amar le Halach, since I said to you, Halach, here, this is yours, the money that I said I'm going to give back to you, this 50 zuz, it's as though it was a loan. And be'ena chamishim, and the other 50, halomodi, hilkach, leka hodas mixas hataina. Here is the fundamental machlokas between Reb Chia and Reb Sheshas. When I say, Halach, here is your money, is that like I had a loan and I'm giving it back? Or is that like me being modeh b'mixas hataina? That's the machlokas between Rav Chia and Rav Sheshas. Rav Chia is of the opinion that you can't take my money and make it like a loan. You're a thief. Yeah, I got to give it back. And I lent you money, and now it's time for you to pay it back. You were kofar on part of it. Fine, I was kofar on part of it, but it's not a halva. It's modeh b'mixas hataina, and therefore yishava. Masha'ein kain, we talk about the sheet of Rav Sheshas. Rav Sheshas is of the opinion that no, it's kind of like a halva. Says the Gemara, I understand what you're saying. I understand. However, we have a big problem with Rav Chia. Rav Sheshas, excuse me. Rav Sheshas was of the opinion that in the case of Halach, if I say to you, here, this money is yours, we had said that you're pater. The problem is that with Rav Chia, we had a Mishnah to support it, our Mishnah from Daf Beis. But remember, right, by Rav Chia, we said v'tanatuna. Rav Chia was of the opinion that in the case of Halach, I'm obligated to make a shvua, and I brought our Mishnah as a raya because our Mishnah also has a shvua. But Rav Sheshas, if you argue on Rav Chia and you say you're pater in the case of Halach, what do you do with our Mishnah? Says the Gemara, Ula Rav Sheshas, Kasha Masnisin. The Gemara says, Amar Lach Rav Sheshas, Masnisin Takanas Chachamimi. Rav Sheshas says, yeah, I hear you. I hear what you're saying, but our Mishnah is not really what we're talking about. Our Mishnah is only talking about a din derabanan. Mido Raisa, there's no requirement for a shvua, because, like he said, because it's similar to a halva, and it's not b'modeh b'mixas hataina. So when our Mishnah on Daf Beis says that one is obligated to make a shvua, that's only talking about a din derabanan. Says the Gemara v'idach, 5 lines from the bottom. What would Rav Chia say to this answer? Says the Gemara, you're correct. Takanas chachamim hi. You're right that our Mishnah on Daf Beis is a takanas chachamim. However, and this is very important, however, umihu, we have to analyze this din derabanan. I amris bishlamami deoraisa helechayev. Therefore, matakne rabbanan shvua kein deoraisa. If you want to say that in the case of Halach, there's a chiyuv deoraisa, and the Mishnah on Daf Beis is mimicking that chiyuv of a shvua, and therefore it's ke'ein deoraisa. So then the Mishnah on Daf Beis, which is a shvua derabanan, is mimicking the din deoraisa of shvua by Halach. However, but if you want to say that mida oraisa, that halach is really potter, like Rav Chia wants to say, that causes a problem. Then metakne rabbanon on daf beis amud aleph. You think that the rabbis in the Mishnah of daf beis are going to be in a scenario where they create a shvua de leisa de kavasa b'de oraisa? We don't have shvuos deoraisa that aren't mirrored after shvuos derabanan. We don't have shvuos derabanan, that aren't mirrored after shvuos deoraisa. So therefore, the nafkamina, says the Gemara, the nafkamina between Rav Chia and Rav Sheshes is not in our Mishnah and Daf Beis. They both agree that that's a din derabanan. But Rav Chia says that there's no precedence for the Mishnah, for the shvu in our Mishnah. Rav Sheshes says that there's no precedence for the shvu in our Mishnah, but Rav Chia says that there is precedence for it. Says the Gemara Meisvei, wait 1 second, I have a question. And now we turn to the top of Dalet Amud Beis. You can see the font on Daf Hey Amud Aleph gets smaller. I don't know if this applies in the old Gemaras. Do you see the same? By me, the font on Daf Hey Amud Aleph is even smaller, and this too is a long Amud, very thick. Someone said to me today in the Beis Medrash, every line is a sugya. That is correct. In the early parts, it's been the case for Bava Kama too. It eased up a little bit at the end of the Masechta because we had some repetition of sugyas. But the Bavas are known to be meat on the bone. They're not meant to be, it's not Maseches Megillah. Even Yevamos was different in a certain way. And Yevamos was complicated not because every sugya was so deep, but more because every family tree was complicated. It's an external factor that we're amaratzim, and it was hard to learn the cases. Here, every line is a different deep sugya. Everything needs time. Everything needs a lot of time. So that's why this is a little bit harder than some of the previous Masechtas. Again, even hard is not even the right word. It's just walking through snow. It's just every step requires work and patience. So let's ask another kasha. It says the Gemara Meisvei, and we're on the top of Dalet Amud Beis. Slaim dinarim. Rashi says on the top of the page, Slaim dinarim shtar shekasu ploni love mi ploni slaim below piresh kama. Horrible document, by the way. I borrowed money from you with no dollar amount in the document. It's pretty useless, other than I know I'm on the hook for something. So says the Gemara, what do we do? Like, how do we execute this document with a dollar amount that's unknown? So says the Gemara, Mal ve'omer chamesh, ve'lo ve'omer shalosh. Let's say we have a case scenario where the lender says, I lent out 5. He's expecting to get back 5. And the love agrees that he owes 3. The discrepancy, of course, is 2. Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Hoel v'ho de mixas atayna yishava. This is a classical case of modeh b'mixas atayna. I said I borrowed 3 against your claim, you're the lender, that you lent me 5. I owe you 3. That's modeh b'mixas atayna, and I have to make a shvua on the balance of 2. Rabbi Kiva Omer, we're on Dalet Amud Beis, 3 lines down. Eino ela kemeshiv aveda upater. Very, very strange. Rabbi Kiva says this isn't a halva. This is like a lost item. Okay, we're not getting into the Rishonim now. But that's what he says. Says the Gemara, Ktani Mihas, what did we see in this brisa, the one at the very top of this Amud on Dalet Amud Beis, that Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer hol v'hod b'mixas atayna yishava, that because I, the lover, the borrower, admitted that I owe you 3 of the 5, therefore I have to make a shvua. Look at what the Gemara says. Taima de Omar Shalosh. The reason why I'm modeh b'mixas atayna yishava is because I said I owe you 3 out of the 5. However, Hashtayim, the diuk is that the case that was created in the brisa was where I said I owed 3 out of the 5. But if I would have only paid 2, so there's a diuk. Remember, our brisa gave the case of 3. Why didn't the brisa give a case of 2? So that's odd. It must therefore be that there's a diuk to be made that Hashtayim Potter. And says the Gemara, V'hai shtar de kamodi be helachu. This is the shtar that is a helach shtar, because when he said I owe you 3, In effect, he was saying, Heilach, here's your money. V'shma mina, Heilach pater. What we see from here is that Heilach is pater because, again, the diuk from I told you I owe you 3. Why didn't the case of the Brisa say 2 must therefore be 2 is pater, must therefore be that Heilach is also pater from a shvua? That's Rav Sheshes. That's not Rav Chia. So therefore, this Brisa on the top of Daled Amud Beis is a kasha against Rav Chia. So says the Gemara, lo, that's not correct. This Brisa is not a kasha in Rav Chia. I would tell you that it would still be the case that if in our Brisa at the top of the page, on the top line, it said Velova Omer Shtaima, even had it been 2, we would have said Chayiv. The only reason why the Brisa gave a case of the Lova saying I owe you 3 out of the 5 was le'afuke mid Rebbe Akiva the Amar Meshiv Aveda Haveyu Pater. The only reason we said 3, we did something like a quirk in the Mishnah. We could have said 2. Why did we deviate from what would have been a smarter thing to say, which is 2? Because now you left open an inference that 2 is pater. The reason we said 3 and not 2 was to make sure that we all knew that we didn't agree with Rabbi Akiva, who held that we were talking about a case of Aveda. That just comes to teach us, like Reb Shimon ben Elazar, that he doesn't agree with Rabbi Akiva, and really we are dealing with a case of Moda b'mixas hatayna and your chayiv. Therefore, no problem for Reb Chia. Says the Gemara, Ihachi, if what you're saying is true, that we're just trying to preclude the shita of Rabbi Akiva, so then Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer, we have a quote from our Mishnah from the top, the Brisa from the top. There we said in the name of Reb Shimon ben Elazar, he says, Hol v'hoda b'mixas hatayna yishava. That's not the right language. If you're just trying to show us that Rabbi Akiva is wrong, then what you should have said is af zeh yishava mi boile. Should have said even this, even 3, right? Even, all the more so. Even 3, you're going to be by 2, even 3. Why didn't we say the language of af yishava? So therefore, says the Gemara, it must be elo la'olam shtayim pater v'heilach chayiv. Really, 2 is going to be pater, but v'heilach, had it been that he actually said Heilach, then there would have been a chiyuv. Our case is different because over here there was a shtar. And when there is a shtar, things are different than when there isn't a shtar. A shtar without Heilach is different than a case of a shtar with Heilach. Inami, another possible answer is Mishum Dahavale Shtar Shibud Karkos, that perhaps we're dealing with a shtar that has a lien on it, and ve'ein nishbain al kvira shibud karkos. Perhaps in our brisa at the top of the page, the reason why there would be no shvua is because we're dealing with karkos. And version 2 of the last 10 lines of this brisa that we just saw at the top of the page is ve'ika demosiv misefa. We're a third of the way down. We're going until about 12 lines from the bottom of the page where it says masiv. Let's get there. Ve'ika demosiv misefa. Some say that the kasha from this brisa at the top of the page doesn't come from the ratio with the sheet of Reb Shimon ben Elazar, but rather from the Seifa. How so? What did Rabbi Akiva say? Rabbi Akiva Omer, Eino ela kemeshiv aveda upater. Rabbi Akiva said that in our case where the Lova admitted that he owes 3, Rabbi Akiva was of the opinion that you're pater. Says the Gemara, Taima do Amar Shalosh. Perhaps we could make a similar diuk with Rabbi Akiva as we did with Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Rabbi Akiva said that we're talking about a case of Meshiv Aveda, and where the Lova agrees that there are 3, that I owe you 3, then perhaps we can be medayek hashtayim chayev. And says the Gemara, v'hashtar de kamodi bekehelach damishma min chayev. Now, with the inference on the Seifa, when we infer from Rabbi Akiva, now it sounds like a support for Rabbi Chia and a kasha against Rav Sheshes. Says the Gemara halfway down low, that is an incorrect diuk from the Brisa at the top of the page. Lo lamei malach shtayim nami pater. Rabbi Akiva would hold 3 is pater, just like 2 is pater. No question about it. It's all meshiv aveda. And this is the exact reverse. That the reason why the Brisa at the top of the page said that the Love agreed to paying 3 back when he could have said that we're talking about only paying 2 back. The reason why we deviated and did something quirky and abnormal was Lafu came with Reb Shimon ben Elazar. What did Reb Shimon ben Elazar hold? The Amar, he was of the opinion that Moda Mixas Satayna have a Chayv and a Shvua. Says the Gemara, the reason why, in the name of Rabbi Akiva, the reason why our case was a case where the Lova was Moda to paying 3 out of the 5 was Kamash Malan de Meshiv Aveda Have Upater. Is that Reb Shimon ben Elazar is wrong, and we're not talking about a case of Moda b'mixas hatayna, but rather we're talking about a case of Meshiv Aveda. And says the Gemara, Hachanami mistabra. This second approach makes a lot of sense. The Isal Kadaitach Shtayim Chayev. Had it been that the diuk of Rabbi Akiva was that 3 is pater because of Meshiv Aveda, but 2 is Chayev, that doesn't even make any sense. If 3 is going to be pater, how could a smaller number be chayiv? Says the Gemara, B'shlishi hechi pater le Rabbi Akiva ha'yarume kama'arim. If you say that 2 is going to be pater, if you're going to say 2 is going to be chayiv, but 3 will be pater, I'll always lie and claim 3 because it's easier. And yarume kama'arim, I'll just just take the path that works best for me. Savar. If I'm going to claim 2, then I'm going to have to make a shvua. So I'll lie. Ella says the Gemara, Shma mina, shtaim nami pater. So therefore, the Gemara says that you're going to be pater from 2. And if so, Ella kasha l'Rav Chia. That's a problem because here it seems from our Gemara that Shtaim is pater, and if the Bryce at the top of the page is a case of Halach, that means Halach is pater, and if Halach is pater, that's Rav Sheshes, and Rav Sheshes disagrees with Rav Chia, which means we have a kasha on Rav Chia. Says the Gemara, the same 2 answers as we saw before, and with this we'll close. Shani hasam to come asai le'shtara. Maybe there's a shtar here, and it's not just verbal, and halach with a shtar is different than halach without a shtar. Inami, as we saw earlier, mishum dehavale shtar shibud karkos, ve'nishpain al kfir shibud karkos. You can't ask from a case where we have a document that has shibud karkos, where there's a lien. There, we never have a shvua. We'll stop right here. Tomorrow night, Emir Hashem will pick up with Masiv. I'm hoping we'll be able to cover a little bit of extra ground, but I don't know yet. As far as I can see, I don't see any short blot in the near future, but we will catch up at some point. Wishing you all a beautiful night.